The sitting has now resumed. Please be seated.
Private member motions. Private member motion number 3 of 2018-2019. Motion to introduce performance incentive compensation in the civil service, to be moved by the elected member for Bontown West.
Elected member for Bontown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to bring private members motion number 3. Yes, sir, to move private member motion number 3 standing in my name. Sorry, because this one's filed for so long. Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Premier. I appreciate that. Whereas there is a desire by the public for a world-class civil service to meet current and future demands of the public, and whereas the Cayman Islands economy is largely service-based, which places a demand on the skill sets of individuals, and whereas government must compete with the private sector to attract, recruit, and retain talent, be it therefore resolved that the government considers the creation of a steering committee to look at implementing a performance incentive compensation scheme within the civil service, and be it further resolved that the steering committee reports back to this Legislative Assembly within the next 12 months on their findings and recommendation.
Is there a seconder? The member for Bordentown.
I beg to second motion.
The question is that be therefore resolved that government considers the creation of a steering committee to look at implementing a performance incentive compensation scheme within the civil service, and be it further resolved that this steering committee reports back to this Legislative Assembly within the next 12 months on their findings and recommendations. The motion is open for debate. Member for Bontown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the book of Proverbs teaches us, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come again. Tomorrow I will give it when you have it with you. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, when I first thought about this motion, I reached out to several people for their thoughts. I want to say off the bat that none of the people whose feedback I sought were in the public service, as I believe they would have been conflicted. I must admit that I was surprised at some of the feedback, as I was expecting more of a pushback, but I was wrong. There was overwhelming support, Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, from the people I spoke to. As a matter of transparency, most of the people I spoke to were in the financial and tourism sectors, the economic pillars of our economy. I was encouraged by the feedback received in that despite a few bad press that the civil service may receive from time to time, there is general confidence amongst the populace that they do a good job. I believe that there are many public servants that face the public on a daily basis should be congratulated for maintaining an overall positive response from the public. Mr. Speaker, in the last sitting of the Legislative Assembly in Cayman Brac, I noticed the Premier also in announcing the increase, the 5% increase to the civil service, had said, and just to quote from page 25, we recognize which we referring to his government, we recognize we have not achieved what we have done alone, but this government, like the previous one that I led, had been ably assisted by a good cadre of civil servants across all of core government. And so I am pleased to advise, Mr. Speaker, that we have agreed to provide a 5% cost of living increase to the civil service this year, backdated to 1st July 2018, and which will commence being paid in September salary. Providing government financial performance and the economy remains strong, we will look again at a further COLA increase in 2020 to adjust for the consumer price index between 2018 and 2020. This will finally begin to bring civil servants' salaries back on track after 7 or more years of playing catch-up with an increasing cost of living. So I'm encouraged, Mr. Speaker, by the words of the Premier, and also recognizing that the civil servants play a vital role in achieving many objectives of the government. Mr. Speaker, I also looked at other countries around the world to see if what we are proposing here would be different from what other countries are doing or planning of doing. I'm pleased to report that if we embark on this initiative, we'll be joining other countries who already have such an incentive plan in place. Mr. Speaker, I must also emphasize that the Cayman Islands is unique in that we are primarily a service-based economy with limited tangible exports. However, Mr. Speaker, we do have intangible exports. And while those exports may not leave on ships, they leave on planes and on our communication networks. You see, Mr. Speaker, our export is our talent, skills, and work ethic. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say a big thank you to the many men of yesteryear and women that did export our talents on those ships when they went to sea. Their hard work serves to remind us that we were in the talent export business from day one, and the women who stayed behind to manage our country also played an important role in that regard. Mr. Speaker, there are many things we take for granted in these islands. Just last year, we approved the budget. And while that process was long and detailed, one major thing was overlooked. Less than 10 departments in government are responsible for generating the bulk of government revenues. In the last 3 quarters alone, we saw the most revenues collected by government, and early in the year we saw with the financial industry and with their annual fees, and also the tours, the hotels from the tourist accommodation tax at the time of the year where they charge the ICE amount of the ICE room rate. Mr. Speaker, I say all of this to remind the public that more than half of the money collected in revenues are earned not from taxing our populace, but from services that our public servants provide to overseas entities. And if I were to ask our people to consider long and hard how many times per year they make a direct payment to the government, they will see that if they do, it is a small amount. Driver's license, mailbox rental, vehicle license, to name a few. Of course, there are planning fees, which is far and few in between, and unless you're in the construction industry. There may be a work permit fee here and there for employee, but Mr. Speaker, the point is it is still limited. The long and short, Mr. Speaker, is that 40,000 working people do not pay close to $1 billion in taxes that the government needs to operate. A large portion of those revenues or taxes are paid by overseas entities and overseas visitors generated on the talent of our public servants. Does anyone believe our financial service would be where it is today without having the proper public service infrastructure? Does anyone think our tourism industry would be where it is today without having a proper team in place to bring visitors here? Mr. Speaker, this is not to say that only those departments are responsible for everything. No. The visitors could not land at our airports if we didn't have an airport or fire service that meet world-class standards. The visitors would not come here if we didn't have competent staff to build, maintain, clean, and protect our roads. The financial industry would be nowhere without the legal infrastructure to support it. Businesses wouldn't come here unless we had the homegrown talent developed by our teachers and cared for by our nurses and doctors. We in this honorable House, Mr. Speaker, couldn't make laws and regulations to maintain those industries without the support of the staff in the Legislative Assembly, ministries, and portfolios. Mr. Speaker, the long and short is that we owe a great debt of gratitude to the many public servants that keep our economy going. And Mr. Speaker, despite our challenges, and I can say this as a member of the opposition, on the opposition side, despite our challenges, make no mistake about it, the Cayman Islands remains one of the best places on this planet to live and work. Mr. Speaker, as you're aware, I was educated overseas in Kingston and New York. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, when you spend time away from home and you're sitting in that airport and you can look out through that window and you see that little Cayman Airways logo, you get a different kind of feeling as if though you're already home before you even reach home. Now, but come back to my motion, Mr. Speaker, and I just mentioned that part to give my little Cayman Airways people a little props because they do a good job. Okay. Mr. Speaker, compensation in the public sector has the same objective as is in the private sector. It needs to attract good workers and also incentivize them to put out effort. Mr. Speaker, this is always easier said than done. However, part of our job as legislators and political leaders is not only about legislation and regulations, but also about increasing awareness and shaping and changing cultures and attitude. There are some cultures in the public service that we have to change, and there are some attitudes in the public that we also need to work to change. One culture in the public service cannot be that if you're a good worker, we reward you by giving you more work, but not pay you for the increased workload, and in some cases, increased responsibilities. Another culture that we, and I do mean members of this honorable House, need to work to change is the unwritten rule in budgeting where if you don't use it, you lose it. Some budgets are cut year to year based on funds that were spent in prior years. I remember my own days in the public service when, and for those who have been here in government long enough, they would remember those office equipment and office supplies trucks parked out at the back of Glass House building just before the year end because everybody was rushing to use up their budget because they didn't want their funds cut the next year. Equally so, Mr. Speaker, in order for us to change and help shape the attitudes of the general public, we have to change a culture of accountability within the public service. There are some, and I say maybe just a few, that the elected representative of the people can't talk to them. Mr. Speaker, nobody, and I mean nobody, in the public service, including us in this honorable House, are unaccountable. We all must be held accountable. We in this House, every 4 years, are held accountable by the public. If we don't do a good job, we're fired at the polls. There are some who promote a culture where they believe that they can just wait out a minister, or in some cases, wait out an entire government. Mr. Speaker, I say all of this to say, I want the public servants to understand that if we in this Legislative Assembly vote to move forward with this initiative, there will have to be some changes in the attitudes and cultures within the public service in order for us to sell this to the Caymanian people. Now, how would this work? We do recognize that the government have certain financial commitments and obligations and ratios that they need to meet. And what I would propose is that at the end of each financial year, we will look at where we are with regards to those ratios, look at how much cash we have above the threshold, and then agree amongst ourselves what percentage of the free cash per se that we have that we could say, you know what, we can put this within a bonus pool. And then we will leave for the senior leadership within the public service to basically decide how that pool is shared up. I mean, in a sense, Mr. Speaker, we're just looking in terms of voting funds, and then they can basically go back and look how it's done. Now, this isn't something new, Mr. Speaker. If you look at Section 55 of the Constitution, even though that refers to the governor's reserve powers, I just want to remind members, Section 55(1), Section D, where there is, speaking about the civil service, it says, just looking for, well, I just read that whole section. The appointment, including the appointment on promotion or transfer, appointment on contract, and appointment to act in an office of any person to any public office, the suspension, termination of employment, dismissal or retirement of any public officer, or taking of disciplinary action in respect of such an officer, the application to any public officer of the terms or condition of employment of the public service, including salary scales, allowances, leave, passage, and pension, for which financial provision has been made. So, Mr. Speaker, even within our own Constitution, we recognize that even though the governor has special responsibility or reserve powers with regards to the public service, is that it also requires that we make financial provisions to pay the people that the governor may hire, fire, promote, or transfer. One of the reasons why I raised the issue of changing cultures within the civil service, Mr. Speaker, is I recall my own experience in a previous life when I was working at Cable and Wireless. And that was the time when Cable and Wireless actually had a monopoly. And we embarked on what we refer to as a balanced scorecard exercise, where what we did was we introduced 3 other metrics to complement the financial metric that we look at, and explain just briefly. In a nutshell, when you have a monopoly and you're charging roughly $1.50 a minute to call the states back then, you're going to make a lot of money. So they were profitable. What the balanced scorecard said was, listen, let us add 3 more metrics to the financial performance to see exactly how the company is doing. Let us look at our customer service levels. Are our customers happy with us? Let us look at our internal processes. Are we an efficient organization? And also let us look at our ability to innovate, basically add new products and services. And what we found, Mr. Speaker, when we did that exercise is that while the company was performing well across the region, granted it was a monopoly in many places, the customer service levels were poor, our internal processes were poor, and our ability to innovate was poor. And that was where we took the initiative to move from what we call POTS to PANS. In telecom term, POTS means plain old telephone service, and PANS mean pretty amazing new stuff. And that's where you start moving from TDMA to GSM and all that kind of stuff, and different phone lines and the whole 9 yards. But it was an exercise I remember being a part of that was quite useful in my own understanding, but at the same time, being part of an initiative to break the culture, the monopoly culture, and preparing the company at that time to go for competition, which we know Digicel and others are coming with. So, Mr. Speaker, I say all of that to say, in touching on the culture, what we need to work on also within this house is our own measurements in terms of performance. We need to move our budgets from stuff like we can purchase 10,000 hours or have 2,000 visits. I mean, 10,000 hours to do what? 2,000 visits to achieve what? I say that to say that we need to move our budget from output base to outcome base. We need to pay not for output, but rather outcome. And when the outcome is exceeded, we have to reward those that go above and beyond. As I said before, Mr. Speaker, we can't keep rewarding good workers with more work. They have families, they have children, and most of all, Mr. Speaker, they too have bills. I mean, plaques and awards and so forth is good, but you can't carry none of them plaques down and pay your electricity bill or your mortgage, Mr. Speaker. And when I consider that the average public service salary is still around $3,000 per month, and maybe a little bit more, I'm sure that many people will agree that that's not a lot of money. But, Mr. Speaker, I am sure that some people out there may say that I'm not comparing apples with apples, but rather apples with breadfruit, as civil servants have free health care and don't pay pension. With regards to the health care, I would say to those people, try limiting your health care options to only the HSA and see what happens. Try getting your prescription filled out at the HSA. While on the subject of prescription, Mr. Speaker, I would like for the government to start thinking about expanding the health care options available to all civil servants. I understand that we should always try to use the HSA first, but at a minimum, this is something that should be considered. Maybe even start with expanding the pharmacy options. Medicines are considered goods and goods, and they're variable costs. They have expiration dates. You know, if the private sector is already spending money in that remit to bring in medicine, I mean, why not look at, those options? But that's a different topic for a different time. I just had to squeeze that inside here. But pension is fine, Mr. Speaker, but we ain't going to wait 30 to 40 years to collect it. You can't wait 30 to 40 years to pay your electricity bill or buy groceries. Mr. Speaker, there are some who believe that politicians like to pander to civil servants because they're a large voting bloc. I don't think that anyone who have seen any recent Public Accounts Committee can accuse me of pandering to civil servants. I think I've done enough to probably annoy some of them. But in life, Mr. Speaker, you have to give Jack his jacket, and you have to give credit where it is due. In around June of this year, Mr. Speaker, I gave the Minister of Finance and his team their due for getting their entire portfolio signed off and having the report tabled in the first sitting, the first available sitting. That was a great achievement. As we're sitting here in this house, we also have financial numbers up the way to September 30th. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, as a person who have been CFOs in many large organizations, and I've been doing this for quite some time, that's actually a great achievement by the Ministry of Finance in terms of what they have done. And it is those kind of work that you have to think about and you actually have to reward. Not that I'm just singling them out, but I'm just showing in terms of the efficiency. I mean, at the end of the day, the Minister of Finance must have some leeway, or the chief officer, to say, you know what, this work don't come, you don't achieve those kind of work keeping 8:30 to 5 hours. Though you achieve those by doing long hours in the night. And Mr. Speaker, for people like yourself who have been involved with the budgeting process before in government and the tight deadlines, you see the amount of work that goes into the budget process and the amount of documents. So I like that because that's one of the things that comes to us a lot. Mr. Speaker, I also like to propose or make it clear to the public that what I'm proposing is not new and revolutionary, as it is already included in both the Public Service Management Law and the Public Service Regulations. And I just want to read briefly, Mr. Speaker, Section 50 of the Public Service Management Law, where it says, the performance of a staff member reporting directly to a chief officer is to be reviewed at the end of each financial year by means of an annual performance assessment undertaken by the chief officer and involving the staff member concerned. It goes on to say the performance of each staff member other than a staff member referred to in subsection 1 is to be reviewed at the end of each financial year by means of an annual performance assessment undertaken by the relevant head of the department or other manager in the civil service entity and involving a staff member concerned. For the purposes of an annual performance assessment, performance is to be assessed against the performance, sorry, Mr. Speaker, Section 51. I realize this marker is for the other page, my apologies. I just want to read Section 51. It says a chief officer may operate such performance incentive arrangements as he thinks suitable for the staff of his civil service entity, provided that the arrangements comply with the personal regulation. Performance incentive arrangements, including performance-related remuneration, are to be directly linked to the performance assessment system specified in Section 50. And it goes on to say in Section 52.2, Mr. Speaker, the amount of performance-related remuneration is to be determined by reference to the extent of achievement of the staff members' annual performance agreement for the financial year. So, Mr. Speaker, as you can see from the Public Service Management Law 2018 revision, we have already, this Honorable House have already set aside and already recognized that such an incentive plan or incentive scheme is needed within the civil service. So this isn't new, Mr. Speaker. And if you even look inside the personal regulations, Mr. Speaker, and I want to draw a reference to section, just making sure I got the right one now, 47, it also speaks about incentive pay for civil servants that perform. So, Mr. Speaker, what I'm actually saying isn't new. All we're saying is that we have thousands of people every day that leave their families. You have hundreds of people that, while we're at home at nights sleeping, they're away from their families, working to keep us safe, being on call, and everything else. And I think we also do need to recognize their service. Another thing I just want to touch on briefly, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of leadership. In many countries, as they are being developed, the government takes a proactive role, plays a pivotal role in leading the development. We saw it in the United States during the era of trains, where the government did a lot of investments, where the government put the infrastructure in place to build commerce and everything else. As advanced as we may be, Mr. Speaker, we are still a developing country. And I was pleased when I saw people within the private sector start saying, wait a minute, if government can give a 5% increase to their employees, why can't we get the same? And at least it started the national conversation that people needed to be compensated. I think we also now have an opportunity to also send another message to the private sector that we intend to do what we need to do to attract and retain talent. And if you don't want to pay them out there, we will pay them inside here. Granted, of course, we'll go through the same competitive process. But the thing I'm trying to make, Mr. Speaker, is that in a service-based economy like the one that we have, more organizations need to be paying bonuses. They need to be paying incentive. And I think if we can take a leadership role, I think we'll be sending a strong message to others that they should also follow suit, because people do watch what the government does also. I wanted us close by reading a quote from Romans 13, verse 7 and 8. Pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed. Revenue to whom revenue is owed. Honor to whom honor is owed. Owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Mr. Speaker, this is the law. The law requires we do something about it. And I think it is high time now we at least start. Even if it is just a phased approach, it is the law. We owe it to the thousands of people who get up every day to do it. And that is all I'm asking of this honorable House and the members, is for us to consider each year. I know we have limitations, but to consider each year, start looking at this part of the law to give our hard-working members of the public service something other than a plaque and award. They still need to pay their bills. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member, the Honorable Deputy Governor? You need the podium?
Yes, sir.
Bordentown West. Bring the podium back. He's coming. He's coming. Yes.
Sergeant coming.
Thanks. Yes, we need a podium for the staff.
If you would carry it, he might accept the motion.
Elected.
The governor might accept the motion. You gotta try to do something, I'm not giving.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise to add my contributions and to first give my support to the motion, which resolves that the government consider the creation of a steering committee to look at implementing a performance incentive compensation scheme within the civil service, and that this steering committee reports back to this Legislative Assembly within the next 12 months on their findings and recommendations. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member from Bordentown West and also the member from Savannah for recognizing the vision of the civil service to be a world-class civil service, and for raising the matter of performance incentives as a strategic tool that we can use to incentivize civil servants who lead the charge towards this goal. Mr. Speaker, one of my favorite quotes, and I think it's from Mr. Richard Branson on leadership and customer service, is that if you look after your staff, they will look after your customers. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that's exactly the whole genesis and the basis for this motion. If we take care of civil servants, we show them that we care, that we value them, but also that we will reward great performance, that they will also in turn raise their performance. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had the pleasure of welcoming a small group of new civil servants to the civil service, mostly Caymanians, I'm very proud to say. And that was exactly my message to them, is that we want to be a good employer, an employer that pays them well, that shows that we care about them, but also to hold them accountable for their performance. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this motion serves as an acknowledgement that there are many high-performing civil servants deserving of recognition and reward. Mr. Speaker, allow me a bit of leeway to just give a few examples of things that have happened recently that has really inspired me and for me to be really proud to lead our civil service. Mr. Speaker, if you think back to what happened a few months ago where our governor was withdrawn and I had to step up. But it wasn't just me that stepped up. A number of other civil servants all stepped up to take on roles that they were not used to performing for an extended period of time. I had chief officers step up. And one chief officer I want to just highlight, Ms. Gloria McField-Nixon, did the brunt of the acting, was here at the Parliament, represented my office exceptionally well, appeared before the Public Accounts Committee. I think she did exceptionally well there as well. So it just shows, Mr. Speaker, that we have some exceptionally good civil servants who are willing to rise to the call of duty to do things that they would not normally do and do it at an exceptionally high level. So I want to really sincerely thank Ms. Gloria McField-Nixon and all of the other chief officers and heads of departments and deputy chief officers who all rose to the occasion. But like I said, Ms. McField-Nixon really did an outstanding job and acted for me for many, many, many months and did a very good job. Mr. Speaker, I spoke to the member from East End and he gave me permission to tell us about something that happened with one of his constituents a few weeks ago. And it's not often, Mr. Speaker, and I think we all know the member from East End well, that he gives us praise. Exactly, only when we deserve it. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, that after the performance of civil servants in this case that I share with you, he did call me to say he was so pleased with our response. Mr. Speaker, a Caymanian lady awoke one morning a few weeks ago, opened her eyes, and could not see. Out of the blue, was not sick, didn't know what was wrong, went to get some tests done, couldn't find out what was happening. Finally, within a few days, she was told, if you don't get to an eye specialist overseas, within a few days, you're going to lose your sight. Permanently, probably. Of course, the lady did not have a passport. She had not been naturalized. They had no way to turn. They went to the passport office. The passport office gave them advice. Now, our naturalization system, in our best turnaround times, we probably will process an application in 2 to 3 months. Passports that are issued in the UK take about 4 to 5 weeks. But through the amazing work of civil servants, that lady applied for naturalization at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, and at 11 o'clock, Mr. Speaker, the next morning, I swore her in as a new citizen. 11 o'clock the next morning, she applied made her application at 4 p.m. the day before. Mr. Speaker, seeing that lady's and her husband's reaction to what the civil service has done for this lady, she was in tears of joy. It got better. She went out to the passport office. They issued her an emergency passport, and she was on a flight, I think the next day. Mr. Speaker, that makes me so proud because my role in that was a very small part. I didn't have to tell the team that we needed to perform a small miracle and get this done. They did it. Civil servants did it. And it just showed that we have this great privilege as civil servants to make people's lives better in a very fundamental way. But as the move of the motion says, I can't reward those civil servants right now that did this amazing work. I don't have the ability to give them a bonus for that, and I'm sure we all agree that they would deserve that. And I hear of these stories, Mr. Speaker, all the time. I was at a function recently and talking to a teacher, and she was giving this story about how she had worked with this student after hours, working with them, putting in additional effort on her time, not asking for compensation, just doing what is right as a teacher to try to improve the performance of one of her students. At the end of the session and for her birthday, the young man walked up to her and gave her a gift from Victoria's Secrets. I thought that was really special. But it just shows again Mr. Speaker, that, that touched the Speaker. She was so proud to say that. But as the mover said, she can't take that Victoria's Secret's bag or gift to the supermarket. So we're all on the same page here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've seen civil servants take on the challenge that we have given them to not only do the work that we are paying you to do, but look at how we can make Cayman better by doing some additional things. We now have ministries and portfolios going out into the community and repairing people's homes. The ministry that Minister Hugh leads decided that they would go and paint graves at a cemetery as part of their social responsibility obligation. The Department of Commerce has been helping a lady who is blind repair her home. These are things that civil servants are doing when they're not at work, on the weekends and the after hours, or we give them some time off. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm saying all of this to confirm that we agree that our civil servants has been doing an amazing job. We are not perfect, we're not world-class yet, but we are certainly well on our way, and we have some amazing people within the civil service who are deserving of performance-related pay. Mr. Speaker, we realize that while our systems and leaders are getting better at identifying, recognizing, and celebrating exemplary performance, we acknowledge, as I said, that much more can be done. Mr. Speaker, we recognize the role that a properly designed and implemented incentive scheme could have on performance and our ability to attract, retain, and recruit talent. Again, we've seen some amazing achievements in this area. We've been able to attract some amazing, bright young Caymanians to the civil service in the past few months. People that I don't believe would have joined the civil service a few years ago. But because of they see what we've been doing and working hard to make us a world-class organization, people are coming in, bringing in that private sector mentality that we do need in the civil service. However, Mr. Speaker, in order to realize these benefits, we must ensure that we have a scheme that is fit for purpose, has clear objectives, is fairly applied, and I stress the word fairly applied, and sustainably funded. Mr. Speaker, the Public Service Management Law has provided for performance-related pay since its enactment in 2005. The move of the motion confirmed that earlier. But for numerous reasons, these provisions have not been implemented. Mr. Speaker, I can share with this Honorable House that we have faced significant challenges in transitioning to performance pay. However, I can confidently say that we are making steady progress. Mr. Speaker, why hasn't this section of the law been implemented? The first stumbling block, Mr. Speaker, came at the inception of the law when performance pay was scheduled to take effect. You will recall that shortly after the law came into effect, the 2008 global recession came upon us, which we were not in a good place to reward performance. As a matter of fact, we were in cost reduction mode and austerity mode, as a result of this, we then had to delay the implementation of the performance pay provisions within the civil service. We did it for a short period of time, and then later on we did it for an indefinite period of time as the recession deepened. However, Mr. Speaker, as it is now regularly reported, the financial position of the Cayman Islands government has rebounded from a deficit operating budget to achieving healthy surpluses, with saving in personnel costs contributing to this outcome. Performance management compliance. The introduction of performance pay requires a robust performance management system and process. Internally, the civil service has made major strides in improving performance management by adopting automated tools and centralized reporting. This has increased compliance with the requirement to undertake annual performance reviews. There is still important work to be done to ensure the benefits of performance management are being realized, with staff being held accountable for their individual performance, and high performers can be both recognized and rewarded. So what have we done, Mr. Speaker? The introduction of performance pay requires us to build capability, to set targets, have performance discussions, in other words, have the hard discussions and the courageous conversations that are needed to determine performance levels. During the last fiscal year, the portfolio of the Civil Service has appointed a dedicated HR advisor to support leaders in managing performance of teams across the Civil Service. Since June 2016, 50 training sessions have been delivered to 500 staff. Again, this is about performance management, and managers have begun using performance improvement plans to tackle underperformance or underperformance. We have also introduced a range of incentives that require only short-term financial investments. For example, the Deputy Governor's Award Scheme includes a modest monetary award for recipients of the Chief Officer's Choice Award and for the Cayman Islands Government Employee of the Month and the Employee of the Year awards. Since 2015, approximately 100 civil servants have been recognized for their performance through this program. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the internal and external constraints, the civil service has taken modest steps to induce performance consideration during pay awards. Mr. Speaker, you will recall that the elected government, and we want to again thank them, this is in 2014 and in 2016, gave honorariums to the civil service. Again, this was done on the basis of performance. This segregated outcome has reinforced the message that performance matters. That's in line with the comments made by the mover of the motion. With the government's support, we implemented a pay stagnation remedy for civil servants whose salaries had been frozen for 3 or more years during 2015 and 2016. This started first with our teachers, our police officers, and then spread across the civil service. This remedy required civil servants to have achieved a satisfactory or higher level of performance in order to receive the pay stagnation awards. Mr. Speaker, in education, it was recently announced by the minister that the introduction of discretionary teachers' leave, which will allow our teachers to take some leave during the actual school year without having to be without pay. Again, that is rewarding our teachers for their performance. POCS will shortly be approaching Cabinet to support the introduction of honorarium provisions in the personnel regulations. Both of these initiatives, Mr. Speaker, are aimed at allowing appointing officers with mechanisms to award high performance in a manner that does not require long-term sustainable investment. Mr. Speaker, the mover of the motion talked about leadership and the importance of effective leadership, and we could not agree more. Mr. Speaker, performance pay must focus on rewarding the correct behaviors and outcomes. This year, for the very first time, Mr. Speaker, we introduced core competencies framework for the civil service designed to provide clear and consistent performance expectations in the areas of building capacity, working together, and delivering results. These core competencies have been incorporated into the 2018 performance cycles for senior leaders for 2018 and will be rolled out for all civil servants in 2019. We have also launched our continuous professional development series for senior leaders, with speakers focusing on core messages to improve performance across the civil service. Mr. Speaker, really, leadership is the key. Our leaders must be able to inspire and to motivate their teams, but also to hold them accountable, to have the courageous conversations that are needed, to ensure that the civil servants are focused on delivering the key projects of the government in a timely manner, that they are responding to recommendations from the Auditor General, that they are doing the work that they are required to do and doing it with pace. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the training that we've been doing. So over the last 10 months, we have had a lady named Nita Clark to come and give a session to our senior leaders about the importance of engaging for success. In other words, engaging with your teams so that you have that relationship with them, so that when you are holding them accountable or having that courageous conversation, they understand that you're doing it for the right reasons. We had a gentleman named Shep Hyken come and talk to us about leading a customer-centric organization. We had David Marquette come and talk to us about intent-based leadership. Mr. Speaker, that was a very, I think, dynamic presentation. If you allow me for 2 minutes to just speak about it. So Mr. Marquette was a submarine commander, and he came to talk to our senior leaders about moving away from command and control leadership to an intent-based approach. So he gave this very powerful example of where a submarine commander is told that you are going to be assigned to a particular submarine, and you will then have a year in which to prepare to captain that submarine. You are put in a classroom, and you have basically schooled in every aspect of the submarine. You know where every bolt, where everything is, because you have to be in total command of that submarine when you are hundreds and hundreds of feet below the surface. So he was ready, and then 2 weeks before his command, he was called into his supervisor's office, and he was told, "We have decided to move you to a completely different submarine." He said, "But I have never been trained on that submarine. The whole purpose of you training me is that I don't have to learn on the job." And he said, "No, we want you to go and do this, captain this other submarine." So he followed the instructions. He went, thought he got familiar with the submarine, and off they went. So as you know, Mr. Speaker, the captain stands and he gives an instruction. Someone repeats the command to make sure he got it right, and the person carries out the command. So he said, "All ahead, second gear." His chief officer repeated it, "All ahead, second gear." But the driver did not move the submarine. So he repeated it, "All ahead, second gear." It was repeated again by his chief officer. Again, the driver didn't move the submarine. That happened 3 times. Again, same results. He finally said, "Why aren't we going to second gear? Why aren't we moving?" And his chief officer responded, "Sir, this submarine doesn't have a second gear." He said, "Well, why didn't you tell me that the submarine didn't, why did you repeat my order? Because you gave the order. So it was a very impactful illustration about command and control, and a lot of our uniformed services was there who deal a lot with command and control issues. So those are lessons that we are passing on to our civil servants in leadership positions. We had Ron Clark come and talk about leading and maximizing the performance of diverse teams. And recently we had a group of persons come to talk to us about improving customer service skills for senior leaders. Next week, Mr. Speaker, we're having a two-day conference with about 200 of our senior leaders, from persons coming to talk to them about leadership across the spectrum. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we are doing everything we can to improve our leadership capacity within the civil service so that we can move to performance-based pay, because we do want it to be credible, and like I said, we do want to make sure that it's done in a very fair manner. If performance pay is our future, Mr. Speaker, and pay stagnation was about addressing the past, then bringing ourselves current through cost of living adjustments is our present focus. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the elected government for their support of the grant of the COLA for civil servants from September 2018 and their commitment to bringing the cost of living current by 2020. Again, they moved the motion, mentioned that in his opening debate. Because, Mr. Speaker, civil servants were hurting, and civil servants were expressing their concern to me. It is very difficult for them to concentrate and provide that high level of service that we expect when you're worrying about, am I going to be able to pay my light bill? Will my children have lunch money? So providing that cost of living increase and providing it at a good rate of 5% really made a difference. And Mr. Speaker, when I walk around the civil service today, I see a lot of positivity and high performance. It has made a difference, which is why we're supporting this motion, because we do believe that performance pay will continue to improve, show a positive result within the civil service. Mr. Speaker, every day we see more and more examples of performance worthy of recognition and reward. In March this year, 30 Happy or Not terminals were deployed across 10 of our priority departments to allow customers to rate our performance. I'm sure if you've been traveling, you've been at the airports and going to some of our government departments, you've been seeing the Happy or Not terminals there where you can press if you're happy, if you're very happy, happy, not so happy, upset. Mr. Speaker, what have our customers told us? Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to say that yesterday, not last week or last month, yesterday, this is how fast we're getting the results. 681 customers pressed those buttons. The results show, Mr. Speaker, that 95% of our customers were either very happy or happy with our customer service. 95%. I know that the Minister for Infrastructure will be happy to know that 80% of the customers who pressed those buttons at the DVDL, where everybody gets their driver's license in Georgetown, said they were happy with their customer service. So a few weeks ago, that was not the case. But we've been doing a lot of work at the DVDL to try to improve the customer experience there through e-government, through putting in additional staff, and it's actually working. 80% of the customers who went there that day, no, let's put it this way, 80% of the customers who pressed the terminals said that they were happy with the customer service. So that is good performance, Mr. Speaker, that is worthy of reward. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, and this is the one that really impresses me the most, I believe, is that at our airport, in the midst of our renovations, the customs and immigration officers have been getting rave rewards from their customers. They regularly score in the high 80s and 90% of passengers. Thousands of passengers coming through the airport press those buttons. 14,000 passengers, I think, pressed the buttons last month. Again, high 80s or low 90s were very happy with their customer experience at the airport. But we have not been able to reward our immigration and customs officials for their great work. That's the first impression that people get of the Cayman Islands. And for those numbers to be very happy in the midst of renovations is absolutely amazing. Mr. Speaker, good management is critical to the success of performance pay. Under the leadership goal within the 5-year strategic plan for a world-class civil service, there is a strategic objective to demonstrate accountability and high performance. Ongoing work includes implementing changes to streamline disciplinary provisions within the personnel regulations. The strategic plan identifies the importance of leaders rewarding high performance while tackling poor performance in a timely and effective manner. Specifically, we have committed to taking numerous actions, including to provide a framework and training to improve goal setting, which will better align broad outcomes with department and employee performance. That is critical. Facilitate recognition and incentives for our high achieving staff. Provide leaders with training and coaching on giving effective feedback and holding direct reports accountable. Extend the use of 360 feedback to all former leadership roles and enhance our HR management systems. In addition, we have committed to reviewing our pay policy generally as our HR focus reverts to more business as usual activities. I submit that this work could accommodate a review of the readiness of the civil service to implement performance-related pay. In summary, Mr. Speaker, we are in agreement with the movers of the motion that performance pay is an important issue for the civil service. In our legislation and in our current, past, and future work plans for strategic HR development, we acknowledge the potential that performance pay provides to enhance our overall remuneration offerings and, most importantly, to achieve high performance. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we recognize that such a system must be designed and implemented to drive the right behaviors, emphasize government outcomes, because we are working to the priorities of the elected government, maintain the confidence of staff and the public, and 4, be financially sustainable while delivering value for money. Mr. Speaker, I believe that I have demonstrated that there is already the will, the strategic intent, and plans to position the civil service to successfully implement such a scheme, and that we are making clear progress towards that important goal of performance-related pay. Mr. Speaker, we will continue the work underway to prepare the civil service for the introduction of performance pay, as this work is already encapsulated within the 5-year strategic plan. The natural mechanism for reporting progress would be within our annual progress reports to be shared with Cabinet, this Honorable House, and the public that we are so very privileged to serve. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, we agree and we support the establishment of a steering committee to look at implementing a performance incentive compensation scheme within the civil service, and I will ensure that the steering committee reports back to this Legislative Assembly within the next 12 months on their findings and recommendations. Matter of fact, we hope to do that much earlier, given that the progress is already underway. Mr. Speaker, I again thank the movers of the motion for bringing this motion and for recognizing the good work that's going on in the civil service. And I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your attention and support. Thank you.
The member for Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the seconder of this motion, this is very timely and of great importance. As I listened to our Deputy Governor in his acceptance, it was very uplifting, very positive. And I know this goes back to the introduction of the public service management law, which encapsulated a lot of this thing, but your predecessors never had the opportunity, as you indicated, because of some rough times after 2008. But I want to thank you, and as I listened, it's quite evident that the infrastructure is in place to bring this on board. You drew a good illustration of already initiatives taken by the ministries, and I'll just draw one example. The Minister of Education, in her brave stepping out there, and to me it almost seemed like she may not have had approval to indicate that she was going to ask that you guys look at helping the teachers. What a wonderful thing that was and is. Because there's nothing more important, Mr. Speaker, than those teachers that deal with our children. And each day it becomes more evident. The difficulties they're having, the peer pressure that is out there. You hear some of the negative things from a few of them, of those children. But we rarely ever hear about the good, positive stuff. And I know that the hours that these teachers spend to assist, staying after school, working and staying with the children till the parents pick them up. I just wish that some of these parents would take the responsibility to spend more time with those young children. It's a rough world out there. When you look what they're exposed to on the television, on the internet, the pressure that's there from so many ways. I just hope as parents that we take the time to spend with those children. I must, at this time, thank the mover of this motion who came to me when he first thought of it. A young, energetic Caymanian that has worked at the higher echelons of different businesses and done so successfully. He seems to have a vision that fits in to many of our young people and what can be developed within an organization of the mammoth size of the civil service. And as I noticed how he and the Deputy Governor clicked, thinking almost on the same wave, it's a good feeling that as I move on up and out, that we have people like this that can manage. And Mr. Speaker, you know in the olden days what it was like. The fierceness sometime you met, if you dare stand on the threshold of certain areas of the civil service, you got boxed down and put in place. But under the leadership of our now Deputy Governor, he's open to listen to anything. He has a time, it just seems, that, and he's been able to embrace it. Having spent almost 12 years in cabinet, I just want to take this opportunity to recognize when I was thrown in there head first as a farm boy, as one of my colleagues used to call me as a minister, but I was blessed to have some wonderful civil servants working with me. Miss Andrea Bryan, her successor, Miss Diane Montoya, Mr. Colin Ross, Ken Jefferson, and I'll always remember Ken and Ronnie Dunn and them at finance time. My goodness, they literally, Mr. Speaker, as you know, lived in that time in the glass house. How they held out. And the ungodly hours that they had to put in. And of course, our present star, Miss Gloria McField. What a tremendous and wonderful personality for a young Caymanian. And I'm glad that she has had the opportunity to be down here and act as acting governor for the deputy governor. It's good. And we need to highlight these, and I'm so glad that the elected member for Bordentown West, in his way of getting things done and making the observation, and you can hear he's well studied and read on many of these things. I'm almost certain, Mr. Speaker, we will see a difference. And there are so many other civil servants that have busted their chops over the years. And I look forward to the day when the proper infrastructure is in place and whatever needs to be done to reward these tremendous hard. Just sitting in this legislative assembly over, just second to you, going into 26, in my 27th year, the time that the civil servants spend down there with us, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, sometime 4. It's good to acknowledge and reward these hard-working civil servants. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Acting Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to give a brief contribution to the debate on this motion, and to begin by thanking the mover of the motion, member from Bordentown West, and the seconder, the member from Savannah, for bringing what I think is a very good motion, something I think we all can support. Mr. Speaker, I recall before I moved into the world of politics, coming from the private sector, you'd always hear the sometimes unpleasant comments being made about civil servants and the civil service, and how civil servants were considered, people who couldn't be fired, who couldn't hack it in the private sector, and the only place for them to exist would have been the civil service. I didn't subscribe to that because thankfully I have family in the civil service who showed me a different view. However, it is probably still prevalent in the private sector that you do hear people with those attitudes. But after getting elected in 2013, Mr. Speaker, when I was with the then government, the last administration, as a councillor, I got to spend a lot of time working with civil servants in the ministries that I was attached to. And I learned, at that point in time, Mr. Speaker, I achieved my own appreciation for the work that civil servants do. I won't stand here and say that the civil service is perfect. I don't think any organization in this world is. However, it is not as broken and useless as some people tend to label it. Mr. Speaker, I worked closely with the now Deputy Governor on an initiative that he he spearheaded and was pushing at the time, called the Civil Service Reimagined. And since that time, Mr. Speaker, even after I stepped away from the government and came over to the opposition side, I have continued to see the hard work and effort that went into that initial effort. That initial initiative continue to grow, continue to improve, and I've seen the civil service improve in the short space of time that I have been involved in at this level in politics. And it all starts, leadership starts, Mr. Speaker, at the top. So I have to give credit where credit is due. That strong leadership from the Honorable Deputy Governor is what is inspiring his civil service to achieve their best. And they're doing it, Mr. Speaker, under not perfect circumstances, as this motion points out. We have a system now that puts them all on an equal footing. The compensation isn't based on performance. It may be based on cost of living from time to time, and they do get increases. But those who excel and go beyond the call of duty, and there's so many examples, I'm not even going to stand here and try to give examples because I know I will forget 90%. But to be more general and broad, Mr. Speaker, I think about the police officers who, and the fire service, who on a daily basis, the prison, put their lives at risk. And it's easy to stand here and say that, and it sounds like a cliche at times, but when you get to this level in politics where you are representative and you work closely with those individuals, then you get a much better appreciation for what they do. As a representative in one constituency, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, we may complain, or not complain, but talk about the workload that we have and the pressures that we have on us. But I always stop and think, when my constituents come to me with a concern, 90% of the time I pick up the phone and I call a civil servant. They're the ones that we go to assist us in dealing with the problems facing our constituents. I work closely with the police, number of agencies, NAU, and I have to say that without their assistance, and I'm a member of the opposition, I'm not a member of the government, but they still assist us in the same professional way. They still get back to us when they can with information, whatever information they're allowed to share. If they can't share it, they're very good at explaining why. So I get into very, very few quarrels with civil servants. I'm not going to stand here and just heap all the praises on the civil servants, but I've always thought about it and the situation that they work under. They do deserve recognition in the form of compensation. I know that there are rewards that are given and to show appreciation, but as the member from Bordentown West said, Mr. Speaker, they can't always take those recognitions to the grocery store and to CUC, and they do have bills to pay and families to take care of. And quite often I've observed they spend a lot of time away from their families. I can speak for one in particular, my brother, who put in some very long hours, very, very long hours. And I think all the chief officers and people at that level, that is just par for the course for them. When we sit in caucus, when I was with the government, going over reports, we may spend 5-10 minutes talking about a report, Mr. Speaker, that a civil servant may have taken 5-10 hours to prepare. But it was all done on time and to give us the information we needed to make decisions and have discussions. Mr. Speaker, I think a scheme such as this would also allow the cream to rise to the top. And I say that because, as I said, it's not perfect. We know that there are issues. I think the Honorable Deputy Governor has been brave enough to stand up and admit that there are issues and things that need to improve. I'll use the DH, for example. There's a lot of negativity aimed at the DH right now over garbage collection and so on, Mr. Speaker. But that doesn't say that the entire DH is at fault and that the entire department is just filled with people who are incompetent and can't do their jobs. But I think in implementing something like this would actually encourage and incentivize those hard-working members of the DH to shine and to put their best effort in and know that at the end of the day, they're going to be appreciated and recognized and rewarded in a way that they can appreciate. I spent a lot of time in private sector, Mr. Speaker, and quite a bit of that time was at a managerial level. And I understand what it is to lead, but I also understand that you can't just always lead by telling people what you expect of them. You have to give them an incentive, make them feel appreciated, and then they will give you their best. It's a two-way street. This, I think, would be a huge morale boost for the civil service. And while there may be financial restrictions and restraints, I'm sure that there are ways that this can be implemented so that it doesn't break the bank account. And I also think that the knock-on benefit to this would be that the civil service would actually improve in terms of efficiency and revenue generation and cost cutting. So we can't just look at it, Mr. Speaker, as an expense item, increase in spending. It will also be something that is going to be reciprocal in terms of its effect on the bottom line of the civil service. So we always have to look to the longer term benefit. I think it would also, in terms of competitiveness with getting talent and retaining talent, especially people who may already be in the private sector, this would also make the civil service a bit more competitive in attracting people, because private sector and employed people, Mr. Speaker, are used to this sort of compensation scheme. And that has been, I think, one of the weaknesses of the civil service in attracting the top talent as well, is that it's hard for them to compete with that. So I just want to encourage the Honorable Deputy Governor and his team, and when I say team, I mean the entire civil service, to continue to shine and do your best, and know that while we may have our quarrels and disagreements, we do, as legislators, and I think I can safely speak on behalf of all of us, Mr. Speaker, do appreciate the hard work and effort that goes into supporting what we do as representatives. And a lot of us appreciate that we wouldn't be good representatives and appreciated by our people without the effort and support of the civil servants. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to say that clearly I support this motion and what it's trying to achieve. And I want to thank, as the member from Savannah said, I want to support the member from Bordentown West in being innovative and creative in his approach as always, and bringing fresh ideas to the table, new ideas, and things that I think are helpful, very helpful, and if taken on board, will definitely do a lot for this country. Thank you.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think I'm going to be very long because all the speakers before me have pretty much said it all. And that's less work for me. But I had to definitely show support to my colleague, the member from Bordentown West, in bringing this motion. And particularly to all the civil servants, because I think it's safe to say that we all agree now that this motion is going to be successful, and another opportunity for civil servants to be truly rewarded for all the hard work that we talk about. But my colleagues have already said how hardworking many of the civil servants are. And I have to echo the reality of even being in opposition and not on the government side, how hard the civil servants work for us when they call. I literally exactly the same experience with me. When I call and they go out of the way, it's almost, you feel like you're the premier of the country, because they stop pretty much all they're doing to try to address the concerns that you have on behalf of your constituents. And let me tell you, it doesn't go unnoticed. I sometimes say to myself, this is obviously the role I should be playing in respect to being an elected member, because I don't think I could have the patience and put in as much as you guys put in, and put up with as much as you put up with in respect to us. Because there's some strong personalities in this honorable house, let me tell you. And I'm not sure I could do what you do. So believe me when I say we recognize it and we appreciate it, because when our day is pressured and constituents are ringing off our phones, we want to call you and say, man, get this thing done. And guess what? It gets done. And without the work of the civil service, because the civil service deals with the services and needs of the people, that's the Cayman Company. And without those workers working well, there's no us, let me tell you that. So I just really want to take this opportunity to thank you, and to thank my colleague for bringing it. I wish I had brought it myself, but I'm glad to stand by his side in respect to that, and give my full 100% support to it. And I really hope that those hard-working persons are truly rewarded. And just to add one more element, I heard the element of cost come into play, but I think there's many of different strategies we can use that not necessarily have to be monetary. I know some of the members could use a nice long vacation after all the work that they do. So I know that there's strategies that can be found to truly reward them for the hard work that they do. And I just want to say thanks, and I support the motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other member wish to speak? The member from East End.
Mr. Speaker, let me thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Speaker, what is it they say about money should not serve as a motivator? Whoever said that didn't understand what they were saying. Obviously, if we apply it to oneself, we will understand what it means. Mr. Speaker, I have been in my former life, I implemented a system in my workplace. I was one of the drivers behind a performance incentive system. And I will touch on that in a bit. But before I do, I want to say that the example that the Deputy Governor gave was one that really made me come to appreciate I think his office and the staff in his office much more. But he's being a little modest in saying that he didn't have anything to do with it, because I called him that night. And he said he would see what he could do. And somewhere around 9:10, the next morning, he called me and left a message. And when I called back, it was to say that he needed the people in to the office by 11 o'clock to swear them in. to swear the lady in. And by the time I got to them, which was hanging up from him, someone else had already called them. So I certainly would like to publicly thank all of them for it, but the deputy governor had his role to play in it as well. Because I understand how sensitive those things are and how careful one has to be to carry out that particular system or that particular process. We have to be extremely careful when we do that to know that the person has cleared all the hurdles. And then I should also extend my sincere thanks to the ladies over at Passport Office who, in record time, made sure that lady had the passport to be able to leave to get to Bascom Palmer for eye treatment. And I am sure they are very grateful to the civil servants as well. Mr. Speaker, as a member of the government in 2005 to 2009, I had the privilege of serving as the Minister for Communication Works and Infrastructure. One thing I said to the chief officer when I arrived there was, whether we like this or not, I wanted young Caymanians to work for me. And so it was done. They all came in there with relatively little experience after their first degree. And I told each of them that if they couldn't challenge me, then I didn't need them in the ministry. So they could leave at their pleasure. And I expected from them to tie light round their heads at night. There's one. Oh, I told them that. And no, if they didn't tie light round their heads. There was one that came in, young Caymanian, still in the service. And Mr. Speaker, we all knew in the ministry that he was not getting to that ministry until 10 o'clock in the morning because he couldn't wake up. And I believe he probably still does that. But he was there until 12 o'clock at night, long beyond his call of duty. And the next morning, you had a pile of paper on your desk that you couldn't get around for your signature. That's the kind of employee you need. But why can I speak so highly of those civil servants who work for me? Because I empowered them. I tell them, I didn't bring you here to sit down. I brought you here. You are here to do work. And the more work you do, and the more mistakes you make, the better I look. And they did that. They worked, and they worked hard. I didn't bring them there, but we needed people, and whenever they came in. Not me, I can't hire anyone. But certainly, Mr. Speaker, you develop relationship with these people, and if you empower them, you get more work done. Every Monday morning at 8:30, I met with the senior members, analysts, and the likes of that ministry to find out what had gone on the week before and what was planned for the next week. And without fail, They went Target every Monday morning. I recall we gave a gentleman, awarded a contract to a gentleman to do a project. And then the other project, there were two projects. And this gentleman was awarded both because of, through the CTC. The gentleman messed up on one, the first one, and the other one was pending, and he was trying to squeeze the ministry on the first one. And the young chap in the ministry who was responsible for both projects was a little bit concerned that the other project would be messed up. Mr. Speaker, when the contractor had contracts that required him to mobilize on a particular date, and he had messed up on the previous project, the day that he was supposed to mobilize, a number of the staff and I were on the project site at 12 o'clock that night. And 12:15, nothing had been mobilized going into the next day. Of course, the recommendation to me was to write to CTC and resend that contract. That's how closely they monitored those contracts. What more can you ask for as a minister? Every Friday they arrange for us to visit every project being managed by the ministry. Starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I had to buy lunch somewhere outside of the office on Fridays. That's why we got so much work done, because they were all on board with doing it. I hope, and they have moved on into other ministries now, and by all accounts, they're doing well. What I enjoyed most about them is, since I've left, the loyalties they have to whichever minister they're working for. Despite the relationship that I had with them, they will never, ever discuss anything about their ministry with me now. No, I don't try. I will call complaining about a particular thing, and they will say, well, minister, you know, we can't talk to you about that. And I understand that. I understand that. But what is important is that I don't push them, and that loyalty is alive and well towards the minister of the day. I think I enjoy that no more than when we work together, because it just proves how dedicated they are. Mr. Speaker, many people are career civil servants because their families did it. Many of people in their mother, father, uncle, whatever the case may be, and that is their incentive for going into the civil service in service to the country, as opposed to into the private sector where they can make big money. We see the deputy governor. His mother was the secretary to the cabinet. We see many pieces of legislation with her signature on it. We see a young lady sitting in here. Her mother was chief officer. Her grandfather was permanent secretary, personnel, teachers. Her grandmother was teacher and in the service. Her great-grandfather was in the service. That is how it works. Her father was also president of the schools here. So that's how much of these civil servants come to stay. It's not to say that they cannot go out into the private sector. As a matter of fact, if they go in the private sector, financially they would be much better off. But that drive to be in the service of a country is a noble thing to do. I have seen them. I can think of one from East End who is with the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Finance, who is extremely dedicated to the service. One day I hope maybe he'll leave and take over this noble calling as well. Father police, mother rose way up in the civil service, and he come in the civil service too. Brilliant kid, very educated, could have gone out and made all kind of money. The sister, one of the smartest lawyers in the country, but went back to become a teacher in primary school. Didn't hack that and went back. But that drive to go into the service, it's not about money. Much of it is about how this country was developed. There was very little here other than government, and those who came before us went into service. My parents, my grandfather was a vestryman, MacDonald McLean. The next time either one of us got in here was myself. This is 70 years later. My immediate family I'm talking about. Don't push me in that one. So, Mr. Speaker, whilst I too was very successful in the private thing, my brothers and I, a lot of business. I was driven in to service to the country. This is not about money. This is about service. And it must be respected, but more importantly, it must be rewarded. Some of these young Caymanians, see 3 of them sitting down out there right now, and get degrees all over the world, get educated all over the world. They could come back and do anything they wanted to do. What? Their papa went in police force. And they believe that is the noble calling that they must continue. The service to our country, to our people. I can't say that civil servants go in there to look money, because they ain't gonna get rich out of that. Teachers, no one should ever believe that it's money that drives those who join the civil service. No one. I look at the premier. Every one of his family was civil servant, was or still is or civil servant. Every one. Thankful all mine wasn't. His mother, his father, setting out rat trap, rat bait. His mother dispensing medicine. His sister, doctor. His sister, teacher. He gone fool around about lawyer, private practice, and had give it up coming civil service. Public service to serve the country. His grandfather, teacher, take a stab at politics, and as a result, he got a little shot at practicing law. And he was, gray hair was tripping him down by the time he did that. Law agent, we call them by the Turners. Just like Mr. Warren. And it is a noble thing to do. So it's not about money. But certainly we must recognize that when people perform, they must be paid. There are many civil servants elsewhere in the world who are well paid and live a very good life. But you know, civil servants live a good life, but they do it based on being fiscally responsible, very frugal with that which they obtain from the services that they perform for the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, I know I give them enough trouble. I can think of many that I've seen gone beyond their call of duty. Of course, I can think of those, and this is obviously not unique to the civil service. It's throughout private practice too. There are those who will limp along and get longevity of those who do the work. And there are those who come to this country and become civil servants who use the system to enrich themselves. And those needs to be weeded out and sent packing. Not packing out of the civil service, but far beyond the shores of this country. And whatever I can do in my power to ensure they get sent along their way to whichever fair lands they thought they came from, then this fair land is not for them to be operating in. It puts a blitz on the rest of the good civil servants. And I beg the deputy governor to not allow it to continue. Examples have to be set. scrutiny of those who come among us must be more robustly applied. Mr. Speaker, I applaud the civil service. I have learned that, I know what, were it not for the civil servants, those of us who are on this side would be crying out in the desert with no oasis in sight to get things done. Because many of these politicians don't answer, don't respond to us. I just check and see who's got their ears open and not asleep. Well, I don't beat him. I don't beat the dear premier. No, not me. That's not me. I'll go out, Speaker. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, no, we know if there's anything, I'm respectful to those positions. There's the Speaker, the Premier, the ministers. I see the Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, if respect begets respect, and I will do as I receive. Mr. Speaker, what I said earlier was that I had been one of those involved in implementing a performance incentive system in my former life. And I spoke to the Deputy Governor about it. And I believe that system is still in place in that company up to today. It was the Hay system. We had to modify it, tweak it a little bit. But what it does, it is a fair system that allows everybody a fair shot at getting those incentives through their performance. It is a system that requires training of managers, supervisors, /supervisors, so that they can monitor, manage it properly. I don't know what system they're going to look at, but there are other systems available which are similar. And one of the good things about that was that there was a committee of employees who managed that entire system at the end of the day and continues to manage it. They set the criteria for new positions. They create the positions, set the wages, set the qualification required for them, those positions, because they're the ones who are doing the job, and they know what is required. When I was in government with the now Premier and my good friend from Savannah, I called for that on a number of occasions to see about putting in that system. But like the Premier says, there's no future in the past. Time has moved on. Let us now look at a system that does that, or something similar. Because when you do not perform, the incentives will not be as rewarding. when you perform, you will be paid for your performance. How many times have we not heard civil servants feel worked to death in their words, and then others are not meeting this performance standard that is required or should be required by an employer? These systems, if implemented and managed properly, will eliminate all that. And those who do not perform year after year will understand. How many times have we not heard people say, well, I was given all 5s for the last 5 years? That is impossible. The frailties of human being does not allow 5 if 5 is your top favorite thing every year. No matter how good you are, it doesn't allow it. So it shows a fair, it gives a fair representation of your performance from top to bottom. And there are times when you're going to get 2.5 if you didn't perform properly because you ran out of time, or you didn't meet your deadlines, or you didn't meet your goals. You didn't get 4. No matter how much time you put in, how much light you tied around your head, you didn't meet your goals, and you didn't have sufficient reason not to meet them, to justify not meeting them. Therefore, that mark has to fall. How many times have we not heard people, because of they come to work dressed properly, that they get a 5? Well, really? Am I not required to come in here in business suit? So what, if I put bow tie on, I'll get a 5? Or a pink shirt? That is the requirement. You get it 3. You have consistently met it. But people will give them 5. What that tells me is they have not been properly trained. You turn up every morning at work at 8:30 for 8:30? That's what you contracted to do. You know you can't get 5 for that. But people are giving people 5. Then when something happens, government hands are tied. I have seen it. They even went to privy council with it, because they were performing so well based on what was being, the assessment that was being done at the time. Once it is done properly, everyone will be satisfied, because those who are not performing will recognize it. But it requires coaching along the way, all year long. You can't go and... I recall when we were in cabinet, we were asked to do a performance of the chief officer when we went in 2005. And just before the election in 2009, we were asked to do another one. I said, I won't be doing one now. That's 4 years later. Those things must be done once a year, and coaching must be done during the year and recorded properly, so that at the end of the year, I can say, Mr. Attorney General, all on April so-and-so, I had to discuss with you so-and-so. Here is the memo you signed agreeing to that. Now, since June, we have had 2-3 meetings, but it was to commend you for what you did. You have been doing, you have improved your performance. That's how it's done. But if every file note says I had to call you because of tardiness, because of not performing properly in this area and that area and that area, you can't expect to get 3. That means you haven't met the minimum requirement that I am expected you to meet, which is a 3 midway. I don't know. Maybe we will find a system that civil servants, those who work hard, will be rewarded accordingly. Those who don't will be brought up to work hard, because that's what it does. It rewards those who work hard and bring those up who are not by virtue of coaching them and getting them up to the employer's requirements. That's what it does. And hopefully, the deputy governor will look at one of those systems. I believe they have the system now, but I don't know if it's if it was fully implemented or there were some problems with it, was what I was told some years ago. Mr. Speaker, those are the systems that, if the deputy governor is serious about this world-class civil service, he needs to put systems in place that are fair. And when he and I talked, and I said fair, he emphasized that. He said must be fair, which is true. It must be fair. It must be understood by all. And there must be good referees to resolve the differences between employees and employer, manager and employee, or those who are supervised. I believe the civil service has some bright, 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 bright stars. Can't expect these kids to come out of university, good universities, and they don't go in the private sector, they go straight to government. There is something to be said about that. We need to use them. We need to stop taking the initiative away from them to utilize that which they have learned, but more importantly, get the experience that is required to take over the positions that are about them. Every time somebody gets promoted, whoever was in that position should be able to get a bigger job. Why are we afraid to assist those who are at the bottom to get more experience? The quicker, and this thing we have in the civil service about succession planning, and then you gotta apply for the job afterward. I've never heard of it. It's not working. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me relate a perfect story. When I was in cabinet and we assessed, what's his name? George McCarthy, Donny, George Chief Secretary, Donny Deputy, both around the same age. There is no one being trained to take over the positions. That same premier and that same gentleman there from Savannah, and to some extent me, we advocated for that young man to come from immigration, come over there, to sit down and watch Donny. That was a fight in cabinet with that little man you had to look up for, that had to look up tying shoestring. You can ask the Premier, Mr. Speaker, that was the fight we had in there. You were there too. Oh yeah, the good Attorney General was there too. You remember. You remember well. I can speak about it now. That cabinet gone now. Long time. But that is what succession planning is about. When I was at CUC, Peter Thompson called Richard Hugh and I and said, listen, one of you or both of you need to take over this company. Richard, you need to go do your MBA, and you do it by correspondence because I can send both of you off at the same time. Richard went, got a 4.0. Fool me. In the middle of it, I went and got in this thing called politics and dropped my little MBA. Richard, the company was like that. Peter Thompson, general manager, VPs. My leaving to go on to something else, flatten it out. They took out one of those positions, general manager, and only made it one, CEO, general manager. That's how these things work. You don't know what is going to happen. You can plan as much as you want, but you don't know what is going to happen. If we identify someone who is capable of taking over that position, train them, and put them in the position when the time comes. That's one of the concerns I have with the succession plan in government, Mr. Speaker. And this, whatever study the governor, deputy governor initiates, I would ask him to look at that as well, because that's performance incentive too. That's performance-based as well. This thing about picking someone from there because they perform well there, and doesn't mean they're going to perform well in a higher position. Someone who is a back office person by personality will not necessarily be a good front office representative of your company. So I asked the deputy governor to look at that as well as part of this. And let me congratulate the member from Town West and my good friend and long-time colleague, the member from Savannah. Yeah, but boy, not long, that one there. So for seeing the need to bring this, and but more importantly, to thank the government for accepting it on their behalf, the deputy governor on behalf of the government as well, because I think it's needed. I think it's well needed. I think the fact now that this legislature puts its stamp on it gives more credence to what will happen in the future, because this is where the money performance gets to come from. And I believe that at least try to get it through within the next 2.5 years. I don't know what will happen after that, but well, we can do succession plan, but that's from here to there. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the member for Bodentown West and the member for Savannah for bringing this motion. As a new MLA and a leader and member of the ministry that I have the privilege of working with, I have had the opportunity to visit the various departments and units within that ministry. It was important to listen to the civil servants and gain their views and perspectives being made, as well as their challenges. Mr. Speaker, this partnership with civil servants is a crucial one as we work together to improve our country. Mr. Speaker, we seek opportunities to reward our civil servants in the ministry through things such as retreats, staff luncheons, and appreciation events. The team in my ministry works hard, Mr. Speaker, and still maintains pleasant attitudes as they work to achieve the ministry's goals and objectives. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to support this motion that considers the creation of a steering committee to look at implementing a performance incentive compensation scheme within the civil service, and that this steering committee reports back to this legislative assembly within the next 12 months on their findings and recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well said.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't normally jump up and speak too often, but it's not very often that we do hear so much positive in here, including and especially from the representative in East End. Even he was positive today. So I felt it necessary to get up and offer a few words myself. Mr. Speaker, I also had to comment on the member from Newlands who said that we only took 10 minutes to look at the reports that took 5 hours to create. Mr. Speaker, I spend a little more than 10 minutes when I get those reports. The member knows that we are there quite often until 10 p.m. at night, working through those reports and taking into consideration the hard work and the recommendations, although we don't always follow them from the civil service. Mr. Speaker, I sent the Deputy Governor a little WhatsApp, and it's a little saying that I carry around with me on my phone. And it says, the CFO asks the CEO, what happens if we invest in developing our people and then they leave us? And the CEO responded with, what happens if we don't and they stay with us? So, Mr. Speaker, I applaud the motion that we are debating here, and I applaud the member from Bodentown West and honorable member from both honorable members, and the member from Newlands, from Savannah, for bringing this timely and well thought out motion. Mr. Speaker, it can't be easy for the civil service if you think about it. I remember when I was first elected in 2013, I had the privilege to work in the Ministry of Tourism with the Honorable Deputy Premier, and we went upstairs after, despite I heard someone on the radio this morning saying that we need training. After attending some training for new MLAs in the morning, we went upstairs to the ministry and we met with the chief officer, and the Deputy Premier suggested that perhaps he takes one office, chief officer, the office in the middle, and I occupy the third office. And when I looked, I saw all of the chief officer's stuff there, and I said to chief officer, it really doesn't matter to me where I sit. So if all of your stuff is here, I'm happy to go in the middle. And he responded to me that it was fine because all of his stuff was packed up anyhow. He says, every election, you never know where you're going to end up, so I pack everything up. And it struck me, Mr. Speaker. That was extremely profound. To think that you work in an environment that every 3.5 years, by the time you settle in, you start packing your stuff up again. And then you watch the election. You watch the election. You sit and you watch as the government is being formed, and then you wonder, where do I fit into all of this? And so I understand some of the struggles and the complexity surrounding the civil service and the conditions and the uniqueness of their positions. And Mr. Speaker, whether it's perception or whether it's real, I would dare to say it's probably a mixture of both. That every time the government changes, the new government scraps everything that the previous government was doing. And if you think about that, you're not just scrapping what the previous government was doing, you're scrapping what somebody worked hard at for possibly 4 years. Somebody put a lot of passion into it. A lot of time, many, many hours at night away from their families, with the possibility that with a change of government, it's just stuck in a box and put away, without any consideration for their satisfaction or for their efforts to see this project through or to see this effort through. It has to be very difficult for them. How do you develop your own personal gratification from your job when quite often you never see the fruition of your efforts? So, Mr. Speaker, it's important for us to recognize that persons in the civil service, they have their own passions as well. They're there, as the minister from the member from East End said, they're there because they want to serve the public. They're public servants. They had choices. We talked about the education level. One of the things that struck me most, and I was quite surprised about when joining the government, was that 3 levels down within the civil service, you find persons with 2 diplomas along with a postgraduate qualification as well. 3 levels down, not just at chief officer level, but two levels below them as well. And those persons, as a member from East End quite rightly said, could go out in the private sector and make quite a bit more money than they're making with government in many instances. But they're passionate about what they're doing. They want to serve their people. They want to serve the public. I often hear, and perhaps I was guilty of it as well, saying that, oh, running a government should run it just like a business. And that is so far from the truth. When you run your business and you have a department that's losing, or you have a service that's no longer feasible, you just cut it. You just cut it. When you're running a government and you reduce persons at the counter serving people, when you reduce funding in a particular area, you are reducing services to the public, to the people that deserve those, that rely on those services, and in fact, and rightfully so, demand those services. And we make the decisions in here, but it is those persons sitting at the front line in the civil service that have to face the public and deal with the consequences of our decisions. Just like a business, though, I think this paper also, we've been focusing on the positive, but I think this motion also allows us to really accept the truth that not everybody in the civil service is a shining star. To accept the truth that very similar to the private sector, you have 20% of people doing the work and perhaps 80% not quite pulling their weight. And I think this gives us an opportunity to also identify that and recognize that, to reward those who are doing more than pulling their share of the weight, and to encourage and to identify and encourage and give the support to those who are quite not there. So I feel that the timing on this is quite perfect. I have full confidence, Mr. Speaker, as I stand here, that we have the right man at the helm, because I understand, I know, and I see on a daily basis his passion. There's not once that I have said to him I am unhappy about something, and he comes barreling. I send an email, I'm unhappy about something, and I hear the doors flying as he comes barreling through the ministry to come and sit down. What happened? What happened? And that is how passionate he is about his civil service. So, again, Mr. Speaker, it is a challenge. It is a challenge for us as the elected government, as it is a challenge for the civil service to strike that balance, the balance between what we demand as elected representatives and what the civil service expect and what they expect from us, as well as to deserve the respect from us towards what they are trying to achieve, the goals and the ambitions that they have. And the Deputy Governor sits right in the middle, trying to balance those two things. And I certainly would not like to hold that position. I see the challenge on a daily basis, and so I applaud him for his efforts in that regard. Mr. Speaker, with those few words, again, I'd like to thank the mover and the seconder of this motion, and I believe that we are on the right track. I believe that this is timely, and that we have the desire and now certainly the atmosphere and the attitude to make great things happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I will suspend proceedings for 10 minutes.